I've never told anyone this before. I'm the author of The Silent Hour.
There is a type of power in New York City that doesn't have a corner office. It doesn't have a verified social media account. It doesn't have a speaking slot at a conference. It doesn't appear in the profiles published in trade magazines under headlines like "The Future of the Industry" or "Disrupting the Literary Landscape." Those profiles go to other people, to people who want them, to people who understand that visibility is its own currency. This kind of power lives in a handwritten address book, the kind with a worn leather cover, dark green, the spine repaired twice with book tape because it has been carried in bags and set down on tables and opened and closed 10,000 times. It lives in phone calls made from a landline on a Tuesday afternoon. It lives in the particular silence that descends over a room when a certain person walks in, not because she's loud, not because she announces herself, but because over time the room has learned what her presence means. Diana Wells had been a literary agent for 23 years. She had worked at Hartwell and Associates for 18 of them. In that time, she had never once posted on social media, never attended a networking event on purpose, never pitched herself at a panel discussion with a title like "Building Your Brand as a Literary Professional." What she had done was represent Augustine Bell. If you know that name, you understand everything that follows. If you don't, Augustine Bell is the kind of writer whose books are taught in universities, whose acceptance speeches at prize ceremonies last 4 minutes because he doesn't believe in longer, who has been called, by 3 different critics in 3 different decades, the most important living writer in English. He has published 7 novels in 43 years. He trusts approximately 4 people on the planet. Diana Wells has been one of them since his 5th novel. He calls her when he finishes a chapter. He called her when his wife died. He calls her when he reads something that moves him and needs to tell someone who will understand why. He has turned down every other agent who has ever approached him. He has never publicly explained why he stayed. People who knew both of them didn't need the explanation. His new manuscript, the first in 12 years, was sitting in Diana's desk drawer on a Tuesday in April, wrapped in a plain folder, protected by a confidentiality agreement and the particular weight of something that might be a masterpiece. Every editor in New York knew the manuscript existed. None of them had read a page. By Thursday of that same week, someone had fired the only person Augustine Bell would ever allow to sell it. This is the story of how that went for everyone involved. Hartwell and Associates occupied the 3rd and 4th floors of a brownstone on West 57th Street. It is not, on paper, an impressive address. In the world of literary agencies, it is the equivalent of an old church in a city that has forgotten how to build them specific, irreplaceable, valuable, in ways that don't translate to a real estate listing. The founder, Robert Hartwell, acquired the building in 1971 when he was 28 years old, and when the publishing world still operated on the assumption that literature was something you built over decades, not quarters. He was wrong about many things. He was reliably right about that. Robert died in October, 6 months before this story takes place. He died in the leather chair he'd used for 51 years. His assistant Carla found him at 9 in the morning, still in his coat, as if he'd sat down to rest on his way in and simply decided to stop. He left the agency to his family, which meant in practice to his daughter Charlotte, who had been co-managing it with him for 15 years and who understood it with the complete, unromantic fluency of someone who has done a job long enough to know where all the weight is. Charlotte declined. She was 62. She had decided she was done, which meant the agency passed to Theo. Theodora Hartwell, everyone called him Theo. He was 28 years old, had a communications degree from Columbia, and 2 years of experience running a content strategy startup in Berlin that had shut down without particular fanfare. He had his grandfather's cheekbones and his grandfather's surname. He had very little else of Robert's. He arrived on a Monday in April. Robert's assistant Carla had left a welcome note on his desk and a vase of tulips from the bodega downstairs. Theo moved the tulips to the windowsill and immediately scheduled a company-wide meeting for Thursday. Diana wasn't there Monday or Tuesday. She was in Connecticut, at Augustine Bell's farmhouse, which is where she sometimes went when a manuscript was nearly finished, and something in the final pages wasn't quite working yet, not broken, just not fully arrived. She and Augustine had a rhythm for these visits. She would read. He would make tea badly. They would sit in his study for 4 or 5 hours and discuss, with the specific patience of people who have been doing this together for 17 years, whether a particular sentence was doing what it needed to do. She came back Wednesday. She walked in with her coat over her arm and the address book tucked under her elbow. Robert had given it to her the day she made partner, 11 years ago, sliding it across his desk with the offhand manner he used for things he was serious about. The book is worth more than the office. he'd said. She had thought it was a joke for about 6 months. Then she understood. Theo was in the conference room with 2 young people he'd already started calling the brand team. Diana poured tea at her desk, the same blue and white cup she'd used since her first week as a junior agent, saucer slightly chipped, handle worn smooth on one side, and read her morning correspondence. 17 emails, 15 were routine. 2 were from editors asking, with the careful indirection of people who suspect something has changed, whether she'd heard anything about the situation at the agency. She hadn't. That was the honest answer. She understood the concern underneath the question. Thursday's all-hands meeting lasted 40 minutes. Theo stood at the front of the conference room with a projected deck, an actual slide deck, with the Hartwell logo overlaid on a phone screen graphic, and explained that the agency was entering a new era of what he called visibility-led growth. Mandatory, professional social media. Monthly engagement reporting. Follower thresholds for all client-facing staff. He had a chart. The chart had a timeline. Diana sat in the 3rd row. She had a legal pad on her knee. She was composing, in her head, a letter to an editor in Milan about a translation rights dispute that had been sitting in her inbox for 3 weeks. After the meeting, Carla found her at the break room kettle. Carla had been Robert's assistant for 30 years. She communicated the things she couldn't say out loud through the specific silence she allowed to develop before she said anything at all. He asked about your social presence, Carla said. Before the meeting, what did you tell him? That you didn't have one. And he said that was a problem. Diana looked at her tea. She thought about Augustine's manuscript. About the line in the final chapter that had been rewritten 3 times and had finally, on Tuesday afternoon, landed exactly right. Give it a few weeks, she said. It took 11 days. Not for dramatic purposes. Just logistics. 11 days to move through the layers of professional courtesy that insulated the agency's senior staff from the kind of abrupt decision-making Theo was clearly ready to make but hadn't quite built the internal authority to execute yet. You could feel it building. The second meeting about platform strategy. The email about a new CRM system. The quiet rebranding conversation nobody had been asked to contribute to. 11 days. He fired Diana on a Friday afternoon at 4:15 in Robert's office that now had a standing desk and a second monitor where the painting of the Hudson used to hang. He had talking points. Diana saw him glance at them twice. The language was careful the way language is careful when it has been reviewed by HR before being spoken. Alignment with the firm's evolving direction. Commitment to visibility metrics as a core professional competency. Cultural fit in a digital-first environment. He used the phrase digital-first environment 3 times in 8 minutes, which is the kind of repetition that happens when someone is reading from a prepared document and hasn't fully internalized what the document says. He mentioned Diana's lack of social media presence 4 times. He mentioned her resistance to the new framework twice. He said, at one point, that the agency needed agents who were visible beyond their client list, which is a sentence that would have made Robert Hartwell set down his coffee and stare at a wall for several minutes. He did not once mention her clients. He did not mention that she had returned from Connecticut 2 days ago. He did not know about the manuscript in her desk drawer, because Diana had not told the agency it existed yet. You don't send an internal email about an Augustine Bell manuscript. You don't put it on a shared calendar. Robert had understood this without having to be told. Theo had not been told. Diana sat in the chair across from him and listened. She let him finish. I understand, she said. He had been prepared for argument. His shoulders shifted slightly. We do value your contributions. I understand, she said again. When would you like me to clear my office? End of today. If that's an hour, she said. I'll be out in an hour. She stood. She moved toward the door, then stopped. She turned back. The address book on my desk, she said. Just so there's no confusion, Robert gave it to me when I made partner. It's personal property. Theo blinked. Of course. Thank you, she said. She went back to her office. She moved without hurrying, because hurrying implies panic, and she had none. She had the specific calm of someone doing something they have been, in some corner of their mind, prepared to do for a while. First, the address book, into the bag. Then the galley proof from her shelf, first printing of The Garden at Dusk, 2003, Augustine's note on the inside cover in his small, cramped handwriting, for Diana, who understood before I did. She wrapped it in the handkerchief she kept in her top drawer and placed it carefully in her bag. Then the teacup, 23 years. Saucer slightly chipped on one edge, handle worn smooth. She wrapped it in her scarf. She looked at the Olivetti typewriter on the corner of her desk. Roberts. He'd given it to her when she made partner. In case you want to write something someday, he'd said. She never had. She'd kept it because it was his. She left it. She cleared her computer cache. She logged out of the firm's client management system. She did not log out of the encrypted personal email account she'd used for her correspondence with Augustine Bell for 12 years. That account had never been the agency's property. She picked up the phone on her desk and called Janet, her lawyer, who answered on the second ring and said nothing for a moment when Diana explained the situation. "How soon do you want the paperwork?" Janet asked. "I want to be filing as a sole proprietorship by Monday," Diana said. "A new firm?" "I have one client," Diana said. "That's enough to start." "Who?" Diana picked up her bag. "You'll find out," she said. "Start the paperwork." She hung up. She put on her coat. She paused in the doorway and looked at her office one last time. 18 years of books on the shelves, her clients' books, the ones they'd sent her after publication, first editions with their notes inside. She left them. They were the agency's copies. Her copies were at home, marked up in pencil from the first read. She walked down the hall. Carla was at her desk. She looked up, and her face did what Carla's face sometimes did when she had understood something before it happened, and was grieving it anyway. "Don't," Diana said gently. "I'll call you Monday." She walked down the stairs and out into the April afternoon. The street was loud and indifferent. She walked 2 blocks east, bought a coffee from a cart run by a man who knew her order without asking, and stood at the corner drinking it. She didn't feel ruined. She didn't feel powerful. She felt the way you feel when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, and someone has knocked it out of your hands, not hurt, not relieved, not grateful, just suddenly, strangely aware of how much weight you'd been holding. She wasn't going to call Augustine. She had a rule, long-standing and important. She did not bring her professional chaos to Augustine Bell. He was 78 years old and spent his life documenting the world's disorder. He didn't need to absorb hers. She walked home. She made dinner pasta, something simple, the kind of dinner you make when you're thinking about something else. She opened a bottle of wine she'd been keeping for no particular occasion and poured a glass she actually drank. Her phone was on the table. She was looking at it in the peripheral way of someone who is not looking at it. She was thinking about the manuscript in her desk drawer. Not her desk drawer anymore. She was thinking about the PDF copy she'd emailed to her personal account 3 weeks ago, a precaution she'd taken because she took precautions, and she was thinking about what exactly her legal obligations were regarding client materials in the possession of a former employer, and she was composing a question for Janet to ask in the morning. At 7:04 p.m. her phone rang. Connecticut area code. A landline. She answered. "I heard," Augustine said. No greeting. He'd stopped greeting her on phone calls sometime around 2009 and she'd adjusted. "How?" she said. "Charlotte called me." Charlotte Hartwell, the founder's daughter, who had declined to run the agency, who had apparently not declined to watch what happened to it. "You didn't need to." "I'm not worried," Augustine said, with the precise intonation of a man distinguishing between categories. "I'm annoyed. Those are different things." "Augustine, you represent me," he said. "Not the agency. I signed my contract with you. If you are no longer at the agency, my representation is no longer at the agency. This is not complicated." Diana was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone's window was open. Music from 2 floors up. "I'm filing as a sole proprietorship Monday," she said. "New firm, small, mine. When can you have updated representation documents to me?" "Tuesday." "Tuesday," he said, as if she'd suggested Thursday. A pause. She could hear his house, the particular sound of old walls and uneven floorboards, and wind finding its way through the frames. "The manuscript is at the office. I'll have Janet contact Hartwell's legal team about transferring client materials. It should take a week, 2 at most." A silence that lasted slightly longer than usual. "Or," Augustine said, in the tone he used for things he had already decided, "I could recall it as unfinished." "It is finished," Diana said. "I could unfinish it," he said. "In writing. To their legal team. I could do it this evening. An author always has the right to withdraw an unfinished work." Diana looked at her wine. "Augustine," she said, "don't do anything until Tuesday. Let me understand the legal picture first." "Fine," he said. "Tuesday." He hung up. She sat at the table for a while, holding her phone without looking at it. The city was audible, a siren, a door, the particular urban hum that functions as silence when you've been listening to it long enough. She thought about the address book in her bag. She thought about the page near the back where she'd written, in her careful script, the direct line for Ellen Park, the editorial director at the publisher she'd want most when the time came. She didn't call Ellen Park. Not tonight. She just looked at the number, closed the book, set it on the table beside her wine. She'd call Tuesday. The Publishing Institute's annual spring dinner was the following Thursday. Diana had been attending it for 15 years. Her invitation had arrived in January, 4 months before any of this happened, industry calendar invitations being sent out with the seasonal inevitability of tax bills. She saw no reason not to go. She wore a black dress she'd owned for 7 years, which is how she owned most of her clothes, a pair of her mother's earrings. She arrived at the hotel ballroom on Park Avenue at 7:15, which is precisely when you arrive at these events, if you understand them late enough that the early arrivals have had time to become comfortable, early enough that you can see the room before it closes into itself. She recognized 40 faces in the first 3 minutes. The industry's information network being what it is, approximately half of those people already knew she'd left Hartwell and Associates. The other half would know by the end of the evening. Diana had spent 15 years at this dinner building exactly the kind of relationships that meant people came to her with a particular expression when they heard something had changed, not pitying, not surprised, just present. Making themselves available. Ellen Park was at the bar. She usually was, in the useful way, not from distress but from efficiency. Ellen was 54 and had been editing literary fiction for 29 years, and had the specific confidence of someone who has been right about books, often enough to be comfortable about being wrong sometimes. "Diana," she said, and the warmth in her voice carried a specific weight. The warmth of someone who had been waiting for a conversation to become possible. "Ellen," Diana said. They talked. Not about business, about a novel Ellen had edited that had recently come out and that Diana had read and found genuinely moving. About a translation they'd both attended a reading for and found disappointing. The conversation was real in the way conversations between people who love literature are real when neither of them is performing anything. At 8:15, Diana saw Theo Hartwell enter the room. He was with 2 of the agency's agents, and the woman from the brand team, and he was wearing a suit that was very new, in a way that announced itself. And he had the expression of a 28-year-old attending his first significant industry event in a formal capacity, a combination of confidence and uncertainty that reads, "To anyone who has been watching rooms for long enough, as someone who is not yet sure what the room is for." He hadn't seen Diana yet. These things have their own timing. At 8:40, the table assignments were posted. Diana was at table 7, Theo was at table 9. Between them, the table of honor where the evening's featured speaker was seated. The featured speaker was announced at 8:45. Diana had not known this in advance. She would think about that later, about coincidence as a category of event, and she would come to the conclusion that Charlotte Hartwell had attended more publishing dinners than her son realized, and had considerably more influence over table arrangements than anyone at the Institute's board would have. Mentioned to him. The featured speaker was Augustine Bell. He was receiving the Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award, which he had declined twice in previous years and apparently accepted this time because Charlotte had told him, in the specific way Charlotte told people things she meant, that it mattered, and he should. He walked to the podium the way he did everything without hurry, without performance. He accepted the award by holding it for a moment and placing it on the podium without looking at it again. He spoke for 3 minutes, which in this room was practically haiku. He said, among other things, that the most important relationship in his professional life had been with his agent, whom he thanked by name. Diana's name. Not was. Is. The room registered the tense. Several people looked toward the Hartwell table. Several people looked toward Diana. The specific kind of silence that fills a room when the official story and the actual story have just been made publicly incompatible. She heard Theo's chair shift. She didn't look at him yet. After the speech, Augustine made his way through the room with characteristic efficiency, stopping for 4 people, declining to stop for perhaps 35. He arrived at Diana's table with the expression he always had at events. Patient endurance with occasional genuine interest surfacing, briefly, like something moving underwater. "You're here," Diana said. Charlotte asked, he said. He sat beside her. She was specific about the seating. Was she? They talked. Around them, the dinner continued. The speeches, the wine, the particular social labor of an industry that loves what it does and is frequently uncertain about whether what it does has a future. At the table, people came and went. Ellen sat with them for a while. An agent Diana had known for 12 years sat and caught up and didn't ask anything pointed, and thereby communicated everything she wanted to communicate. At 9:30, Theo Hartwell appeared at the edge of her table. She had been expecting it. Once the speech had happened, once Augustine Bell had used present tense in a room full of the industry's institutional memory, the only question was timing. He stood at the edge of the table. He looked older than he had at 4:15 on Friday, which is what 1 week of understanding you've made a serious mistake looks like on a 28-year-old face. "Diana," he said. "Theo," she said. He looked at Augustine Bell. Augustine Bell looked back at him with the particular expression of a 78-year-old man who has no remaining obligation to soften anything. "I'm representing Augustine's new manuscript," Diana said. "Through Wells Literary. I filed Monday." A pause. "The manuscript, that's technically a Hartwell client matter." "Augustine Bell is my client," Diana said. "He has been for 17 years. The representation agreement is personal. It transferred when I left." This was, strictly speaking, contested ground. Janet had spent parts of 3 days on the precise legal language, but it was what the new agreement she and Augustine had signed on Tuesday said, and it was what Augustine had signed, and it was, most importantly, what was true in the way that actually mattered, in the way of where Augustine Bell's trust resided, which was not in a brownstone on West 57th Street anymore. Theo looked between them. He looked like a man doing arithmetic in his head and arriving at a number he didn't want. "We could discuss a consultancy structure," he said carefully. "The firm would be open to—" "Theo." Diana's voice was not unkind. It was final, the way doors are final, not cruel, just closed. "Your grandfather built something real. You have the building and the backlist and the name. Those are genuinely worth something. But I can't advise you on what I know how to do. That knowledge doesn't transfer. That's rather the whole point." He stood there for a moment. He was trying to find the next sentence and not finding it. "The Bell manuscript would have been the agency's defining deal for the next decade," he said, quietly, not accusing, just saying it out loud in the way you sometimes need to say something out loud before you can finish understanding it. "Yes," Diana said. "It would have been." She said it gently, without pleasure. Because she wasn't here for pleasure, she was here because Charlotte had arranged the seating, and because this was, apparently, where the conversation needed to happen. Theo nodded once, the nod of someone absorbing something they can't unabsorb. He turned and walked back toward his table. Augustine watched him go. "Content ecosystem," he said, in the tone he reserved for sentences with structural integrity problems. Diana picked up her wine. "Tuesday was enough to start?" he asked. "Tuesday was enough," she said. The auction for Augustine Bell's new manuscript opened 3 weeks later. Diana ran it from a desk in her apartment's second bedroom, which had good light and a lamp she'd had since graduate school, and the galley proof of "The Garden at Dusk" on the wall where she could see it. She ran it the way she ran everything, without announcement, without performance, with everything's particular precision of someone who has been doing this long enough that the expertise has gone somewhere beneath deliberate decision. 7 publishers submitted. The winning bid was $11 million. It was more than any public estimate had suggested, and it sent a small tremor through the industry, the kind of tremor that means someone's position in the room has just permanently changed. The agency fee went to Wells Literary, which at that point had one client and an address that was technically a home office and a filing certificate from the state of New York. Hartwell and Associates was not in the process. 2 months after the auction, Diana signed 3 more clients. Not Augustine Bell-level clients, nobody was, quite, but writers she had known for years. Writers who had watched what happened and called because they understood what it meant about where the center of gravity was now. She didn't recruit them, they called. There's a distinction, and it matters. She never posted about any of it. Not the auction, not the clients, not the new firm. The address book was updated in pencil, in the margins, the way it had always been. The office, the actual office, 4 rooms she rented on the same street as the agency, 6 months later, because she liked the neighborhood and believed in continuity, had no computer on the desk. Just the lamp and the address book and, eventually, a second teacup, because the junior agent she'd hired needed somewhere to put her tea. The typewriter Roberts Olivetti she'd left at Hartwell's. But Carla, who retired in June, brought it to Diana's new office as a gift on her last day. "He would have wanted it here," Carla said. Diana looked at the typewriter for a moment. The old Olivetti with the sticky D key and the misaligned return carriage that Robert had never gotten fixed. "Put it in the corner," she said, "where it's not in the way." Carla put it in the corner. Diana sat at her desk. She opened the address book to a page near the beginning, a number she'd been meaning to call for 3 months. An editor in Seoul, a translation rights situation that had been sitting in her notes since January. She picked up the phone. The line rang twice. Someone answered. She introduced herself the same way she always had, the same way she'd been introducing herself for 23 years. through 6 job titles and 2 office moves, and 1 lifetime achievement speech in a hotel ballroom, and 1 firm she'd built alone from a desk in a second bedroom. Diana Wells, she said. Literary agency. Not new, not boutique, not digital first or visibility led or positioned for the future of content. Just what it was, the thing itself. The only thing it needed to be. The call lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, she had a deal. She hung up. She made a small notation in the address book, a pencil mark in the margin, the date, and a single word that made sense only to her. The way she'd been doing it for 23 years. She looked at the typewriter in the corner. She thought, maybe someday. Then she turned the page and looked for the next number. If you're the person in your organization who knows where everything actually lives, the person whose exit would leave a gap nobody can explain, you probably already know what this story is about. Subscribe if you want more of them. There are always more.